morning, boys and girls. Today is Wednesday, April 1st. Happy April Fool's Day to all of you. Today I decided that I was going to take you into my kitchen instead of teaching you from my studio, just because I wanted to be able to honor a very, very special dear author and illustrator named Tomie dePaola, who recently passed away. You know that I love his work. I talk about him a lot in the classroom. He is the author of the book Tony's Bread and also Stregonona, and he illustrated those books. He also is the illustrator for The Quilt Story and many other wonderful books. So today, in honor of Tomie dePaola, I decided I was going to share with you my recipe for making homemade pasta and homemade pasta sauce. So I have some ingredients here today that I use. In a pan, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some fresh Hamburg and I'm going to put that into my pan. I'm going to stir that up and let it cook a little bit with a tiny bit of water. I'm also going to add in some fresh ground coarse black pepper, about a tablespoon. Then I'm going to add in a tablespoon of Italian seasoning. And I'm going to stir this and let it cook for just about 2 minutes. After I have cooked the Hamburg for about 2 minutes, I shut that off, and then I take my food processor and I'm going to put in some fresh ingredients in here, and I'm going to blend them until they are all pureed. So it's going to turn into like a thick, juicy like texture. One of the things that I do is I use the bottom bulb of a fresh fennel plant. So I cut all the stems off, I cut the bottom, take out the outer leaves, and I will put those in my food processor. The next thing I do is I cut up a whole medium-sized onion and I put that in as well. And the last thing I add into the food processor is cloves of garlic. So not the full bulb, but 3 cloves that have been peeled. So it's 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to mix this up and puree it, and I'll be back with the next step. Okay, I'm going to take the fennel, the onion, and the fresh garlic cloves, and I'm going to turn on my food processor, which is quite loud. Now that I've pureed it for about 2 to 3 minutes, it is a very thick pulp. This is something that your family would do because there are sharp parts to it. I'm going to take the mixture off of the food processor, scrape the sides, and now it's time to add it to your Hamburg and let that cook until all of the flavors, this is going to smell a little bit like black licorice, but you're going to cook it until all of the flavors have really cooked into the Hamburg. And while that is cooking, we will prepare the sauce. The Hamburg is fully cooked. I'm going to add in the rest of the tomato-based items or ingredients into that to make it into a sauce. And then I'm going to add some water so that it is thin enough to cook without bubbling out, but thick enough, so it's going to cook for quite a while. The first thing I use is a can of fresh tomato puree, a large can. And then I have a lot of boys at my house. We do cook a lot of pasta sauce. So I use about 5 small cans of tomato paste. I like to use the Italian seasoned paste. And then once I have it all in, I'm going to add a little bit of sugar. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my the crushed tomatoes, and I'm going to pour that into the meat as it is cooking. Then I have 5 small cans of tomato paste, the Italian seasoned paste, and I'm going to add that in here as well. So this is going to be very thick with the paste added. So once it is all dissolved into the water of this mix, then I'm going to start adding more water to make it just the right thickness so that it can cook and not burn. I usually like to take the can that I used for the tomato, the crushed tomatoes, and fill that with water because it gets the rest of the crushed tomatoes out from the can and into the sauce. All of the tomato paste is now dissolved into the sauce, and you can see we have a big full pan of sauce. The last ingredient that I put into the sauce is about a tablespoon of sugar. It helps to cut down on the acidity of the sauce. I'm going to add a little of that in. And every family has their own recipe, so just use whatever types of ingredients you like in your sauce, but that base that we added actually adds a wonderful flavor and aroma to the sauce as it is cooking. And next what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I make some homemade pasta, even though if you have box pasta at home, that's fine as well. The sauce is good on any kind of pasta that you can imagine. While the pasta sauce is cooking, I usually let that go about 3-4 hours and just keep checking that. I'm going to show you how I make some homemade pasta. And as I said, the box pasta is fine with the sauce, but I'll show you how in case you want to try making that with your families. In this dish, I have about 4 eggs that I've taken a whisk, and I whisk it until it is all beaten. Then here I have 3½ cups of flour, just an all-purpose flour, and to that I'm going to add ½ teaspoon of salt. Okay, so my measuring spoon. And I just put that in and just give it a little bit of a stir. To the egg mixture, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon. I do have a ½ teaspoon here, so I'm just going to do it 2 times. Half and another half makes 1 whole teaspoon. And I'm going to whisk that up. So our ingredients, boys and girls, are eggs. We will use 4 eggs, 3½ cups of flour. I use ½ teaspoon of salt added into my flour, and about 1 teaspoon of olive oil added into my egg mixture. Now this is where it gets a little messy. I'm going to take the 3½ cups of flour and I'm going to pour it into my mixing bowl. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make like a little well inside. I'm going to push most of the flour over to the walls of the bowl, so it almost looks like a little pool. Please make sure you wash your hands before you touch any food, right? Then I'm going to take that egg mixture again, just give it a little bit more of a stir, or a whisk. And I'm going to pour it into the little bowl of flour. And when you look inside here, it looks like a little pool with egg mixed into it, so right in the middle. And I know you can't see from where you are. I apologize about that. So then you're going to take the sides, the walls of the flour, and just put a little bit in the middle, little at a time. And you just keep pushing it in a little at a time. And pushing it in, and you're covering up all of the egg. And then we start to mix. Okay, we're going to gently mix that egg in with the flour. In with the flour, and remember this, boys and girls, it gets really messy. But if you work carefully, You can do this with a spoon if you like. I do like to use my hands, that way I can feel when it has just enough flour in it, if I need to add a little more or not. But I just keep mixing up around it until all of that egg is absorbed. Once all of the egg and the flour hold together in a ball, what you're going to do is take a very clean, dry surface, and you're going to start kneading the dough. So if you remember, it's kind of like working with Play-Doh. You're going to take the ball, you're going to hold it up, take the heels of your hands and press down and away, roll it to you, down and away, and you just keep kneading the dough like this until it is all together. And there are no more lumps in it. Everything is blended really well. Okay, so now I have the dough all kneaded together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just put it into almost like a little bit of a log. And I'm going to take some saran wrap, some plastic wrap, and I'm going to wrap it and refrigerate it for about an hour. So right now. If you have a plastic bag, you can use that just as well. So here I have a gallon-sized bag. I'm going to take that, put it inside. Make sure to get all the air out of it, because I want it to hold together. And then I'm going to Ziploc it like this. Push all the remaining air out. And then put it in my refrigerator. Please remember to stir your sauce while this is sitting. So as my dough is refrigerating, I'm going to show you how I make some fresh dough in honor of Tomie dePaola's book, Tony's Bread. The first thing that I do is I take some dry active yeast. I take about 1 tablespoon and another half a tablespoon of the yeast, and I put it in a bowl. The next thing I do is I take some warm water. This is lukewarm water. I have 1.5 cups, and I'm going to pour that into the yeast. And the yeast is what helps the bread to rise. So when we start the dough, it's going to be smaller, and when we cover it, and the yeast has a chance to work with the warmth of the room and the warmth of the water, it is going to help the dough to grow. This is definitely something that you can help with, boys and girls, at home. It doesn't involve anything with the oven right now or the stove top. So the water and the yeast together have a tannish gray color. Once the yeast is all dissolved, I'm going to take 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to add it into just under 4 cups of white all-purpose unbleached flour, and just kind of mix that in a bit. Now the next part you can either do, if you have a stand mixer, you can do that in there. It takes a little of the work out of it. Or if you don't have a stand mixer, that's perfectly fine. With this recipe, there's not a whole lot of kneading with the dough. So the first thing I'm going to do with my mixer is I'm going to take the bowl, and I'm going to put in the flour and salt mixture into the bowl. Then I'm going to take the dissolved lukewarm water with the yeast, and I'm going to pour that into the flour. And if you would like to make a well like we did for the pasta, you can do that too, but you don't have to. Now I'm going to put my bowl onto the mixer. Snap it in. At the beginning of this process, I do like to use my big sturdy mixing blade. Turn that on, lift it up, and mix. I'm going to mix for about 30 seconds to a minute. So I'm just going to set my timer. When my timer goes off, I'll be ready to take this out. The flour and all that is coming together into a ball. Okay, the timer has gone off. I'll stop that. Stop the mixer. And here I have the dough. Again, this is a recipe that you are not going to need. I'm going to take the dough and I'm going to put it inside, back in this nice bowl. And it is sticky. And what's left at the bottom of the bowl. And I'm just going to make sure that it's somewhat together. Make sure it's all one big ball. Because I am going to cover this now. In about 1 hour, we're going to see that this dough has doubled in size. So I take a clean, dry towel, cover the bowl, and leave it someplace in the kitchen where it's not too cold. Okay, in 1 hour, we'll take the cover off of that, and then we're going to put it in the fridge for a little bit. Okay, we're back now with the, this is the dough that we had for the pasta. It is very dense and heavy, not like the bread dough will be, but it is not crumbling. So that's really important, that it's not too dry, but it's dry enough so that it won't stick when it goes through the pasta roller. I did get this pasta roller as a gift. If you don't have one, you can also flour a surface on your counter, roll it out with a rolling pin, and use a pizza cutter to cut some slices. Sometimes people will roll them into very thin, a thin string, and then cut them into pieces and roll it with your pinky. There's many different ways to make pasta. So I'm going to show you how I use that here. The pasta dough is cut into 4 equal pieces. I'm going to work it with my hands a little bit like this and start this on low. I'm going to set the roller that I have for the sheets to number 1, which is the widest setting first. And once I have my dough flat enough to be able to start going through here, I'm going to work it into the sheet roller about 4 times. So I'll work it through, fold it in half, and then do it a few more times. There it goes. You see it's coming out as a sheet. It's not quite even yet, because it's the first time that it's being worked. Fold that in half. And now I'm going to put it through again. And I just let the machine take it. I'm not forcing it in. It's rolling on its own time and I'm just catching it. Now look how long that is right now. I'm going to do it one more time because I see that my edges still are quite a bit jagged. Make sure that I fold it. And one more time. Okay, that looks pretty good, and it actually feels not too sticky, but again, not too dry. Now I'm going to set my roller to number 2. So now it's going to make my dough a little bit thinner. So as the dough gets thinner, you're going to see that the sheet gets a little bit longer. Here goes. This is setting number 2. Okay, a little bit longer. Now I'm going to go to setting number 3 and put it through again. Okay, here's the top and here's the bottom. And the last setting I'm going to put on is number 4. So here it's going to get quite long because it's going to be much thinner than when we originally started. Okay. I am going to turn this off for just a bit so it's not so loud. What I'm going to do with this is I'm going to dust that. I keep a little dish of flour on the side, and I do have a pan underneath here, just so that when I do the others, that this doesn't stick. But I don't want to put too much flour because that's what makes the water very starchy when you cook it. Okay, I'm going to lie my sheet of pasta right here on my cookie sheet, and I'm going to roll out the remaining 3 pieces of dough just like that. I will be right back and show you how I cut the long sheet into thin strands. We are almost there. What I did is I took all of the long sheets that I rolled and I just cut them in half so that my strands of pasta are not too long. So I have, it's probably about a foot long, a foot in length. You can cut it wherever you're comfortable. I did change my attachment. So instead of this being a flat sheet roller, this has little wide cuts in it, so it's going to make fettuccine. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. And as I cut them, you're going to see the strands come out. And thanks to the Pingatori family, I have this wonderful drying rack. So as they come out, I'm going to put them onto the tines of the drying rack and let them there while I make my bread. You see the fettuccine coming out? And I'm going to find about halfway, put my hand right there and catch it, and then I'm going to lie it right across the drying rack on one of the tines. And then I'm going to take another, lie it right across. Going until all of my dough has been sliced, and then I can let that dry while I work on the bread and stir the sauce. Okay, we have cut the pasta and it's all on the drying rack, and with the pasta you can either cook it fresh, so you put it into a pan of boiling water with a little bit of salt and olive oil, or if you want to refrigerate it or freeze it, you could do that as well. Depends on your preference. The dough has been sitting for about 1 to 2 hours now, and I'm going to take this dry towel off the top, and the dough has risen to about twice its size. Now I'm going to refrigerate it for at least 2 hours. This dough can be refrigerated for up to 7 days. It does become more tangy as you leave it in your refrigerator. I am not going to grease the bowl yet. This is a no-knead recipe, as I said, so it is quite sticky. I'm going to transfer it into a smaller bowl to sit in my fridge. Okay. And before I take it out of that bowl to start to put it on the pan to cook, I'm just going to dust it with a little bit of flour. But not yet. So now I'm just going to put that towel back over that. I'm going to cover it and put it in the fridge for 2 hours. Hi. I have the refrigerated bread dough that I've taken out of the fridge. It's been sitting for 2 minutes. So I'm going to uncover that. See, it fills the dish. I've washed my hands. I'm going to take a little bit of flour and just sprinkle a little bit on top so that when I take the dough out of the bowl, that it doesn't stick as much to the edge. I've also taken a baking stone and covered it with parchment paper and some more flour. With this dough, you can either make small hard rolls. It is going to make a very crusty bread with a very moist inside. I've preheated my oven to 450. Before I put the bread in, I do have a little metal dish with water inside. That's going to help the bread to stay moist inside and hard and crusty on the outside. So, before I forget, I do have the two books that I was referring to today. We have Stregonona, and I have my little puppet of her here. So I will send an attachment today of a read aloud of Stregonona. This story was written and illustrated by Tomie dePaola. It's based on an old folk tale. And the other story that I would recommend, and I'll try to get a copy of this to you today as well, is Tony's Bread. And that's what we based our two stories on today. So he has a lot of his Italian heritage, a lot of cooking in his stories. He also has written, he's actually illustrated the Quilt Story, which is a very important book to me. He's written many stories on the lives of saints. Here he has St. Patrick, but he's written about many other saints. He had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother, so you'll see that in some of his books. Here's one of my favorites, The Art Lesson, and this is an autobiography of his life when he was young and his experience in art in school. I recommend this one as well. And this one I found just a few years ago. It's called Now One Foot and Now the Other, and it's a story about how his grandfather taught him to walk when he was a little baby, and later in life when his grandfather had a stroke, how he helped his grandfather to walk again. So he has so many beautiful books. I invite all of you to just kind of search the web and see some of the books that he's written and illustrated. And for my artists out there, if you would like to create your very special art and send it over to me, I'll add it to the beautiful gallery of your artwork that I've started upstairs in my my little studio. Okay, so to make the bread, I have floured, I've preheated my oven, I've started the water for my pasta, floured the parchment paper on the stone. Before I take it out, I'm going to put a little olive oil on my hands, just a little bit, and rub it in, because as I take this dough out, it's going to be quite sticky. Okay, I'm going to take about a quarter of the bread dough. I'm going to make a few small loaves. I'm going to break it off, and then I'm going to work the dough into a ball. I'm going to take that and put it flat down on the flour sheet, and then I'm going to do that 3 more times. This will be for the adults. What you're going to do is take a sharp knife and just cut in a couple slits into the bread. So I will take the towel one more time. Good things sometimes do take a little extra time, but there's nothing like the flavor of homemade bread when it's warm and fresh out of the oven. Okay, so this is going to sit for 1 more hour. Just watch your bread when it starts to get a little bit, brown and golden on the outside. I would just take it out and let it sit for a little bit. Please remember to put a little metal pan. Any shape is fine. In size, just put that at the bottom rack while you are cooking at 450 degrees. So my sauce is reheated. The pasta is ready on the drying rack. The water is boiling, ready for the pasta to go in, and my bread has just browned. I'm going to take the bread out of the oven, let it rest, throw my pasta in the water, and as soon as the pasta is ready, I will drain it and serve that with some delicious sauce and some warm sliced bread. Okay, so my bread is out of the oven. I have floured it, it's nice and warm. I have the pasta, which has been boiled up until the point where it floats. I strained it, I will put it in the bowl. And I have this delicious sauce. I'm going to take the ladle, pour it on. I'm going to give it about 6 scoops. And mix it all in. And then we're ready for supper.